Welcome to the diverse sounds of
Good afternoon and welcome to RNCM Radio, and thank you to Dean Smith for his characteristically personal radio jingle, which opened our show. Today we focus on RNCM Prism, hot on the heels of their series of online events yesterday, all under the banner of Future Music 2. More about that later, but first let's turn to two of the founders and directors of Prism to find out what it is and how it came about.
I'm Emily Howard. I'm a composer and I'm a professor of composition here at the Royal Northern College of Music. And I'm also the director of Prism, the RNCM Centre for Practice and Research in Science and Music. Mathematical shapes and scientific phenomena are very often catalysts for my own music. I love to create sonic architectures that respond to patterns in freely imaginative ways. And I first met mathematician Marcus Desoto when making a piece, an orchestral geometry in response to a beautiful mathematical shape known as a torus. It's essentially the shape of a donut. Marcus and I bonded over the torus as he had recently written a play that explored that very same shape. In 2017, we began working together on a collaboration for New Scientist Live called The Music of Proof, and that led directly to the launch of Prism at the RNCM in autumn 2017.
My name's Marcus Desoto. I'm a professor of mathematics at the University of Oxford and also co-director of Prism at the RNCM. For me, there's always been a close connection between mathematics and music, and when I was at school I really felt I had a choice somehow which direction to go in. I was a trumpet player, enjoyed playing in orchestras, a town band, but I also loved doing mathematics, and so for me it was quite a difficult choice to know which direction to head in. So I'm really excited to be able to be part of this venture Prism because it gives me the chance actually to combine these two passions of mine and to explore really what is that connection.
At its core, Prism is a collaborative, interdisciplinary research environment, a space for people, scientists, artists, to share ideas, to meet, to co-create. You never know when somebody is going to say something that will spark the imagination, and it is often, even usually, in the most unexpected situation. And so for me, Prism is about developing and energizing a space in order to encourage and create creative thought between its members, its students, its guest artists and scientists. We're developing a new collaborative method. We're enabling new interdisciplinary expertise to emerge and encouraging the development of new languages and new works that explore the limits of those languages.
I mean, Leibniz once said that music is the experience of counting without realizing that you're counting. Certainly as a trumpet player, I used to spend a lot of time counting bars rest in the orchestra, but for me it goes so much deeper than just this connection of number and rhythm and the Pythagorean idea of whole numbers being important to harmony, because for me mathematics is kind of the science of patterns, and I'd say music may be the art of patterns. And so I think this idea of structure is extremely important to both practices. So it's really exciting for me to have the chance to work alongside composers, performers, musicians, and really push our investigation of what this connection is and to see how fruitful the collaboration might be in inspiring new composition, new ideas in mathematics even.
Prism takes a lead in interdisciplinary and reflexive research between the creative arts and the sciences, with a view to making a real contribution to society, to developing new digital technology and creative practice, and to addressing fundamental questions about what it means to be human and creative today. In 2019, the Royal Northern College of Music was awarded £914,000 from Research England's Expanding Excellence in England Fund to support and augment Prism's research. We're all immensely grateful to Research England for this crucial trust and support, enabling the RNCM to develop PRISM strategically through additional staff, new partnerships, the expansion of existing collaborations, and the creation of a wonderful new space at the RNCM, the PRISM Lab, that launched earlier this year.
It's exciting to imagine what PRISM might achieve with these resources. It seems fairly clear to me, through a combination of Emily's examples and a whole range of pieces of music by friends, students, and celebrated artists from across history, how scientific endeavour and achievement can inform new artwork. However, I wondered if the opposite might also be true.
I think for me, that is the challenge, whether this collaboration can stimulate new things in my own subject of mathematics. And I'm actually working at the moment on a kind of new mathematical idea that I first encountered in the work of Xenakis. So Xenakis has this amazing piece for solo cello called Nomus Alpha, and he uses in there a kind of investigation of a kind of sequence of symmetries kind of related to the Fibonacci numbers, but in the world of symmetry, that I must admit I've never really seen before in my own subject. So he was exploring the symmetries of a cube, and I've started to see whether his ideas might have kind of interest in other sort of symmetrical objects. It's ongoing. I'm not really sure where the research is taking me, but I think that's a great example of a new question that has arisen from not a mathematician, but a musician exploring structure.
So let's hear an example of a piece informed by a scientific idea.
In 2010, I was commissioned by the London Symphony Orchestra to make a new work for them. And I responded by writing Solar, a short orchestral work. My response to the science and the stories behind the sun's strong solar magnetic field. Often, I find inspiration in nature and science. I think deeply about scientific phenomena in tandem with the human history and myths associated with scientific phenomena. And I've created a number of works that have been shaped by thinking about magnetism in this way. And I've explored ways of creating music that behaves as though it is being attracted or repelled by imaginary magnets. I've written luminous, resonant orchestral sonorities, and you'll hear music that is often bursting with energy on the surface, but always with a slow burning and intense core. The recording of Solar that you're about to hear can be found on my NMC Recordings debut disc. It's titled Magnetite. It's performed by the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Andrew Gourlay. I'm always thrilled by the level of sheer energy involved in each of our collaborations. And I'm also pleased that there are already so many different kinds of Prism collaboration. I'll find it impossible to mention them all now. To name a few that have happened this week, we've just had our annual Future Music event, showcasing our cutting-edge work in AI, artificial intelligence, and creativity. It includes our release of Prism Sample RNN, a collaboration between Prism lecturer in composition Sam Salem and Christopher Meelan, Prism's research software engineer, the first at the RNCM. And we featured hugely varied newly commissioned work by Jennifer Walsh, Marcus Desoto, Bofa Ma, Ellen Sargan and Fraz Island. Last week we hosted the second workshop for Changing Music in a Changing Climate, a collaboration between climate change science students and RNCM students. Classical, pop, composers, performers, everybody is welcome. And the collaboration was led by Prism artists in residence Sarah Nichols and Laura Bowler. We have Prism collaborations exploring the work of Ada Lovelace, dynamical systems, Chladni plates, health data, and we work closely with a number of partners including Liverpool and Oxford universities, Manchester Science Festival, the Barbican Centre, Birmingham Contemporary Music Group and BBC Philharmonic. For me, Prism's environment, it's like a melting pot of ideas. And I've come to learn that for the way I work as a composer, it's the resulting collision and union of disparate ideas from diverse sources that excites me. And the subsequent translation of these hybrid ideas into sound is essentially the crux of my creative process.
So my name's David Durer. I'm the Technical Director of Prism. I'm a Professor of E-Research in Oxford, where I'm based in engineering science, and I'm responsible for digital humanities across the university, and that's researchers using digital research methods and IT in all sorts of humanities subjects, including music. I'm one of Prism's founding members. That goes back to 2015, when I first met Emily Howard at a symposium to celebrate the life of Ada Lovelace, and at that time Emily had written her Lovelace trilogy and I'd been writing some algorithms, as ever. Today I think I'm going to claim that Prism really all started in 1843, and that's when Ada Lovelace had written something that both Emily and I were inspired by.
As Prism is primarily located at the RNCM, I wanted to get a better understanding of the role engineers and other scientists have in the centre.
So Prism needs all sorts of people, including engineers and computer scientists, also mathematicians. Prism is practice and research in science and music, so clearly it needs scientists and musicians. It also definitely needs practitioners and researchers. But in fact, the members of the Prism team are all interdisciplinary, so we're all very blended, and that's probably the important thing. We bring it all together so that the whole's greater than the sum of the parts, musical and otherwise. We each bring cultures and conversations into the mix.
So what's a good example of a Prism project that's really been driven by science?
At Fusion Music 2, we're not just releasing some music, we're releasing some software. This is very exciting. So this software or code provides a particular artificial intelligence capability, which is called Sample RNN. People with a bit of knowledge of software will be able to use it to generate samples, especially if they have access to the right AI hardware to do this. We'll also be releasing various things to make the code easy to use creatively, and I think Chris and Sam have done a fantastic job in getting this together.
And, as with Marcus, David is engaged with what music can bring to his field, as well as the other way round.
In Prism, we're using the latest techniques in computing, real cutting-edge stuff. But it's really important that this interdisciplinary intersection goes in both directions. And I can give you an example of why I think this is so important. So we hear about AI all the time, and how AI will be all around us as we interact with our smartphones, our smart buildings, smart cities, smart homes, smart cars. But do we know what it really means for a human to exist in the moment with an AI, to be creative, to be co-creative? That's what we're exploring in Prism, what it means to be a co-creative human. And in my view, all computer scientists should understand something about creative humans, because all computing applications involve them.
So let's hear about a piece of music that brings these musical, scientific and historical concerns together.
So back in 1843, Ada Lovelace wrote, "The engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent." But what does she mean by scientific pieces of music? So in 2015 we did a thought experiment. What if Charles Babbage has successfully built his analytical engine? Big, steam-powered, using punch cards like the Jacquard loom. And Ada Lovelace had programmed it to generate music. What would she have done? So we looked at the maths of the time, and one simple mathematical sequence that's familiar in music is the Fibonacci sequence, where you get the next number by adding together the last two. So it can go 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. And if you then do something called clock arithmetic, so when the number gets to 12 you start again, then we end up with a repeating sequence of numbers, and turn those into notes, and combine them at different tempos, and those simple patterns weave into something interestingly sophisticated. Music and maths are all about patterns. So I made this example piece called Fib 12 for Ada Lovelace Day in 2018. My inspiration for the arrangement was harp music by John Thomas, who's a very significant Welsh harpist that Lovelace had helped see through his early training in music.
You've been listening to an extract from Fib 12, an algorithmically generated work realised by a computer with recorded harp samples by David DeRuer and, well, I wonder at what point I should start to acknowledge the code or program as a co-creator. I was also interested to hear about the understanding of codes and patterns in earlier music, particularly with a composer preoccupied with numbers. In this case was one of the most celebrated composers of all time, known for his balance between beauty and intricate formal severity, J.S. Bach. Back to Marcus Desoto.
But to show how obsessed Bach was with the idea of maths and number, Bach was kind of interested in the Kabbalah, and you can translate words into numbers, and Bach's name, B-A-C-H, when translated into numbers, 2, 1, 3, 8, you add those together, comes to 14. And 14 for Bach was a very important number. It was almost like the number he played for in his football team. And this number 14 you can see coming up as a kind of signature number in a lot of Bach's works. And I think this shows why Bach's doing things very deliberately. They're not coming just by accident or that he's intuitively being drawn to them. These things cannot be accidents. For example, in the St. John Passion, there are chorales which run through the St. John Passion, 11 chorales. And if you look at the number of bars in each of the chorales, at first sight, it looks like quite a random set of numbers. The first 10 are 11 bars, 12 bars, 12 bars, 16, 17, 11, 12, 16, 16, 17. doesn't sound any pattern there. But if you pair them up, the number of bars in the first chorale and the 10th chorale, if you add those together, 11 plus 17 is 28, double 14. Then in the second and the 9th chorale, 12 plus 16, again 28, double 14. And so if you pair them up in this way, kind of symmetrical way, you always get double Bach's kind of signature number. And the 11th chorale itself is actually 28 bars. So I don't think you can do this but deliberately. That 14 is kind of hiding there behind the chorales and really illustrates that Bach was fascinated in kind of numerology and number. But I think, that's really just the beginning of this connection between maths and music. And for me, it's really about the huge structural things that you see in Bach's work right through to the modern day, the use of symmetry, for example, and algorithm, and in the modern day, much more interesting things like Emily Howard's use of the torus and the antisphere, exploring geometry through music. So for me, that's the exciting thing to see, what wonders do we have in the mathematician's cabinet that might inspire the next compositions?
That was the final chorale from the St. John's Passion by J.S. Bach, performed live back in 2017 by the RNCM Chamber Choir and Chamber Orchestra, conducted by David Hill. Now let's hear about the work of one of Prism's recently appointed full-time members of staff.
Hi, I'm Sam Salem. I'm Prism Lecturer in Composition. A lot of what I do conceptually is grounded by the work of psychogeographers such as Ian Sinclair, so his writing is really a key influence and inspiration to me and has been for quite some time. But sonically, I'm really interested in the use of field recordings, both as material to be used in a piece, but also as the source of information that I then use in my pieces. So I use a lot of spectralist techniques. I do analysis of field recordings to derive pitches for pieces. I do kind of temporal analysis to derive behaviors and rhythms from field recordings. And that's something that I've been doing for a long time, and it's really a core of my practice. I also do a lot of sound synthesis, and I'm really interested in hyperreal and impossible listening situations. So I use a lot of contact mics and really close mic'd instruments and sound objects. I really believe in the idea that if you stand anywhere and observe anything, that something interesting will happen eventually. So there's a lot of fishing in my work, I suppose. And that's where the field recording comes in. I kind of like to go to a location that a concept or an idea leads me to, and I'll record in and around that location, and then assembling the piece becomes solving the puzzle of, well, if I've got to write a piece about X and I have this set of recordings, how can I start to find what I need within them? Hemme Lenoir is an interesting piece for me because it's the last tape piece that I wrote, which I wrote in 2015. And you know, by the time I was writing the piece, I was pretty sure that this was going to be the last purely electroacoustic piece that I wrote. So the piece was composed over several residencies, 3 I think EMS in Stockholm. The reason I wanted to go was that they have 2 really old analog modular synthesizers that they've had there for a long time, and they maintain. One's a Surge analog synth, and one's a Buchla, and they're amazing, really. And the funny thing is that when I applied to go to work on this piece, I wasn't really all that interested in analog synthesis. I didn't know what it would bring to my music, and for me it was almost just like a bit of an excuse to go on the residency. And since then I've used analog synthesis in every piece that I've written, and I've assembled my own set of instruments to undertake that kind of sound work. So it was really like an important experience in lots of ways. Untitled Valley of Fear is a piece that I wrote and premiered in 2016, so it's one of my older pieces for performers. In fact, it was the second piece that I'd written, but it's really kind of dear to my heart. So this piece was written for Distractfold Ensemble, the ensemble which I'm a co-artistic director of, and it's part of a triptych of pieces that explore the lives and works of different London-based visionaries and occultists. So the first piece, Not One Could Pass Away, that's about William Blake. Untitled Valley of Fear is about Austin Osman Spare, and The Great Inundation is about Nicholas Hawksmoor. I'm really excited to be a part of the Prism team. I was really delighted to join the RNCM in November last year. It's a wonderful collaborative environment where each of us brings something fairly unique to the group. And as well as that, it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to collaborate on projects that I otherwise wouldn't be able to undertake. Prism Sample RNN is a really good example because, you know, I've dabbled with neural synthesis and machine learning based sound synthesis in the past, but I wouldn't have been able to explore it in this way and develop the tools this fully without having a wonderful colleague like Dr. Christopher Meelan, the Prism research software engineer, to work with. So I think that's one example of the kind of exciting work that we can do when we come together.
You've been listening to Sam Salem and extracts of his acousmatic work Hemme Lenoir and Untitled Valley of Fear for 3 object operators, performative electronics, tape and video, performed by Rocio Belagna, Emma Richards and Linda Yanakoska of Distractfold. It's clear that the heart of PRISM is collaborative work between the RNCM students and scientists. I caught up with 2 doctoral researchers about their recent projects.
I'm Zakia Leeming. I'm a final year PhD composer studying with Professors David Horn and Emily Howard. In my research, I investigate how my compositional decision-making can be informed by information and research strategies in science and medicine. The project with Connected Health Cities came about when they commissioned me to write a piece about their successful initiative in improving health data research in the Northwest. When I met the team, they explained how the success of the project was clear from the improvements that had already been made to the healthcare services in the region as a result. A key part of the success of the CHC model was recognising the individuality of each area in the Northwest, recognising their specific expertise and challenges. The CHC assisted the projects to develop customised approaches to using health data, whilst also getting these different projects together to share their unique knowledge and developing practice. To demonstrate this to an audience, we quickly agreed that it would be fantastic to be able to have additional composers write a piece for some of the individual projects, as well as my piece about the overall project and its methods. I worked with Dr. Amanda Lamb on my piece about the CHC Hub, and we invited RNCM doctoral composers to participate. The composers involved included Caroline Bourdignon, who wrote a piece about the Smart Intervention for Local Residents project, Nate Chivers, who worked with the Public Involvement and Engagement Senates, Isabel Benito Gutierrez, whose piece was about ambulatory care experience, and Towie Howell-Roberts, who worked with the paramedic stroke app. Each composer met with their project to find out about the challenges they were facing and how they were using health data to make those services better and safer for everyone. Each composer had a unique way of setting this information, and it was really interesting to hear them talking about what both parties, the composers and researchers alike, got out of working together. We had some really lovely feedback from the audience as well. Comments such as, "I never thought you could build a creative relationship between music and data," and another that said, "Could feel the patients and families in each piece," showing that at the heart of this is people, helping to keep them alive and living well, and I was really pleased that this came through in both the discussions and the pieces. My piece was about the CHC method itself, which, as I mentioned, had a great deal to do with recognising the individuality of each region, but then helping them to share the expertise they cultivated. I decided to write 4 miniatures, each with a limited set of pitches, rhythms and instrumental techniques to establish a musical identity for each region. Thus, by the end, each of the 4 miniatures had responded to the same pool of compositional options, but they still produced 4 different developed miniatures. As the amount of choice increases, so does the complexity of sound in harmony and rhythm, which operates as a metaphor for how each project's knowledge and strategic decisions developed in complexity as the programme progressed. The piece closes with a finale constructed from prior developed material which I found to have a jubilant quality. I chose this ending to symbolise the improved outcomes for patients and my own positive response to seeing the hard work of these researchers create real change. The project was really exciting because it demonstrated a clear appetite for people in both sectors, health and music, to work collaboratively and share their knowledge. It also demonstrated a public interest in this form of dissemination of what's going on behind the scenes to make our healthcare better. I was later contacted by other research professionals in attendance interested in continuing these conversations. The project was supported by Connected Health Cities, who are funded by the Northern Health Science Alliance and the Department of Health and Social Care.
I'm Robert Laidlow, second year PhD composer with Prism. My research focuses on finding ways to use artificial intelligence as part of the creative process and using it to build up new compositional vocabularies and methodologies to creating music. I really love working with AI for a number of reasons. One of them, of course, is that an AI algorithm will produce surprising and inspiring results that can push your music into completely new directions that you never thought you would go in before. But I'm also interested in AI for a number of other reasons. I love the collaborative element of using this technology. You can work together with a computer scientist, for example, to develop a new algorithm to fit the piece that you're working on or the project that you're writing. I love this idea that a piece of music is not just something that's your own achievement, relying on other people's work, but actually that you can work together with someone else and that your piece of music can be a step forward in their independent research and that you can work together to push forward in this fast developing field. I love interacting with these artificial intelligent technologies, especially because sometimes they're so divisive in the society that we live in. We hear a lot about AI being used to replace humans. Indeed, already Spotify are using AIs to replace artists on their playlists, and you can get an AI to write music for you, for your adverts, for your short films, for all sorts of things like that. I think it's really important for my work to tackle these issues, which are only going to become more important in the future, and to recontextualize these algorithms not only as something that is part of a worrying replacement narrative, but also as a way to augment human creativity and eventually come up with something that neither human nor machine could have invented on their own. I think a really good example of this collaborative methodology and a highlight of my PhD so far was last year's Future Music Festival. And that's not just because it was my birthday last year and also because it was the premiere of this piece, Three Interstachios, but because, again, it was a really good example of this collaborative approach to music making. This piece, Three Interstachios for Chamber Ensemble, I worked very closely with data scientist Christine Payne to create it. Christine is a computer programmer and musician who works for OpenAI, which is a tech firm in San Francisco. And together we trained an algorithm to learn from my own compositions, to imitate my style and to try and write music that it thought was indistinguishable from my music. To my knowledge, this is the first time this has been tried with a living composer in classical music, and it was really interesting for a number of reasons, not just philosophically, but also the material it came out with. It very quickly picked up some aspects of my work, such as my jazzy harmonies or the way I rotate chords mathematically, but found it very difficult to imitate perhaps long-term structure or the way that I phrase music. And this was inspiring and interesting. I love thinking about the way that an AI learns and comparing that to how a human learns. And in this piece, Three Interstachios, I aim to represent that learning process from the start to the end. The title Interstachios is a word that's also created by an AI and defined by it. So this AI was trained on the dictionary and it invented this word interstachio, which means a short piece of music or metal.
That was the second movement of Robert Laidlow's 3 Entastacios, performed live at last year's Future Music Festival by members of the RNCM, conducted by Jack Sheen. Before that, you were listening to Zakia Leeming and her piece Hub, performed by Festivo Winds.
Hi, I'm Sam Duffy, the Centre Manager for PRISM. I joined the PRISM team in January earlier this year, and I look after the operational running of the centre, including managing the lab and teaching space, the web pages and social media, project management, finances, and reporting to our funders, Research England. What I really love about PRISM is that it stimulates and supports collaboration between scientists, mathematicians, composers and performers. It's truly interdisciplinary. And this is more than creating music inspired by different fields and disciplines. It's about people from different disciplines and organisations coming together and examining how they think about their own work through working on a shared project. An equal exchange, if you like, between artists and scientists. The process is usually iterative for us, so participants come together for an initial workshop, then smaller groups might work together before everyone comes back together again for sharing. And this can happen several times in a project timeline, so that ideas can grow iteratively, both within the small groups and through sharing with the larger cohort. For example, the project 8 Cubed. The first iteration ran in 2018 with scientists and mathematicians from Manchester Metropolitan University and composition students from the Royal Northern. This year it ran in conjunction with the University of Liverpool. In a recent sharing, one of the mathematicians described how she'd learnt about the compositional workflow. She had worked previously with Hemme Lenoir during her Lieberhuhn residency at Liverpool with Lasse Remp-Gillen. Working with the RNCM composition student Anna Appleby in 8 Cubed this year, she felt she'd gained even more insight into the process. And in particular, this was because Anna was also exploring her own compositional workflow and so making her thinking and her workings explicit. The mathematician explained how she felt the difference between working with an experienced composer who'd already established their workflow and someone who was still exploring their craft. And while both experiences were equally stimulating, they were also both very different. This is something that PRISM would like to do more of in the future, working not just with established scientists and mathematicians, but also research students and early career researchers. For example, in our project Changing Music in a Changing Climate, RNCM composer-performers are working with 3 climate science doctoral research students from different organisations. They all responded to an open call on our PRISM web pages. The second workshop took place remotely. We were a bit nervous about whether this would work, but it actually went amazingly well, and we were able to include a talk and question and answer session with leading academic and climate activist Professor Julia Steinberger. The energy of the discussions and exchanging ideas was amazing. The scientists are getting thoroughly involved in the creation of a new musical work. It's wonderful watching the pieces evolve. You can read more about both of these projects on the PRISM web pages in the section called Collaborations. It's a long-term goal of PRISM to understand and document what we think is a unique collaborative process. We think it goes much deeper than simply producing music which may communicate or be inspired by scientific ideas. It's about an equal partnership and equal exchange of ideas, and we think this can lead to some unique and different outcomes. We'd love it to be implemented by other disciplines and organisations.
The 8Q project is particularly representative of the spirit of PRISM activity. The first project was originally conceived of and developed by RNCM Deputy Head of Undergraduate Studies, Dr. Michelle Phillips.
I do quite a lot of work with the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester. I've presented my research there a few times, and I sometimes go and run some experiments with visitors, talk about science and music, and I met Sam Illingworth there a few years ago. Sam is a senior lecturer in science communication at Manchester Metropolitan University. And we had this idea. We talked about how the communication of musical and scientific ideas might be enhanced if you bring them together. So we wanted to look into this idea of portraying leading scientific research through the music of leading composers. Music is such a powerful means of communication, and I do think that it can often communicate more effectively and directly than language in many ways. So we had this broad research question of, could embedding important scientific findings in relation to important debates today, such as airport noise pollution and climate change, could that mean that the communication of these messages was even more impactful than with words alone? When Sam Illingworth and I had our plans in place, we then spoke to Emily Howard about recruiting RNCM composers. We matched up the scientists and composers based on their interests, and the teams started working together in their pairs to create these new pieces of music. And the collaborations and the final performance, which included 8 performers, 8 composers, 8 scientists, hence the title 8 Cubed, were absolutely fantastic. The composer-scientist pairs had really learnt a lot from each other, which could develop each of their own practice. For example, one discussion that was had between the composer and a scientist who was working on the migration patterns in bees realised that by studying the sound that the bees make could open up new avenues of inquiry about their migration patterns. So this new scientific idea wouldn't have happened without her collaboration with the RNCM composer. At the performance, we collected data from the audience members on how they found this experience of scientific ideas and concepts being embedded in new music. And the audience research suggests that people really enjoyed this kind of event. People found that the music did communicate the science effectively, and they compared this favourably with their previous concert experiences at the RNCM and elsewhere. And they also said that this event did make them keen to attend future such events. So I think this is really important audience research, not just in terms of science communication, but also in terms of what audiences like and expect in the concert hall. Sam Illingworth and I are currently writing up these results for publication, so we're really pleased that another 8Q'd event is now planned, as these data that we'll also include in our study will hopefully give us an even richer picture of how we can bring together science and music to create something that's really meaningful for composers, scientists and listeners. I'm absolutely fascinated by how audiences perceive music, emotionally, structurally, neurologically and acoustically. What we all do at the RNCM could almost be seen in 3 bits. Someone makes some music, someone performs this, and then someone hears this. And of course those roles don't have to be 3 separate people. My research is mostly around that final part of that process. So how is the material that artists create received by the listener? And more than that, what can composers and performers do to create certain effects on the listener as the work is realised? How we hear music is extremely complex, and research on auditory perception still involves a lot of unanswered questions. I work closely with experts in acoustics, neuroscience and psychology at MMU and the Universities of Salford and Manchester. And together we formed the Manx Research Hub. Manx stands for Music, Audiences, Neuroscience, Cognition and Society. Together we're planning some really groundbreaking and ambitious large-scale studies of how people respond to music by examining their neurological, psychological, physiological and emotional states in response to performance in all its meanings, in its broadest sense. I think that music's an essential part of what makes us human, and the more we understand about how people listen, the more we can learn about why music is so important to every culture in the world.
Hi there, my name is Keely Crockett and I'm a reader in computational intelligence at Manchester Metropolitan University. So my work is in the field of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is about computer systems that have intelligence, and AI tries to make computers act in a more human way and can sometimes learn to make its own decisions. For this collaborative project, the focus was on adaptive psychological profiling from nonverbal facial behaviour. So what's that about? Well, nonverbal messages are continuous and are at least in part involuntary and unintended, and they can be used to measure mental, behavioural and physical states such as stress, deception, tiredness or perhaps comprehension. The work I'm doing uses live interviews or recordings and uses AI algorithms to learn to detect patterns of micro-gestures from a face while a person is answering questions. We can learn, for example, whether a person truly understands something by measuring comprehension, which is useful in online learning, or we can detect if they're deceiving. At Manchester Metropolitan University, we developed a system called Silent Talker, and have worked on research projects with Family Health International in the United States and the Tanzanian Medical Institute on a project to see if patients understood the mock-informed medical consent process.
Hello everyone, my name is Bofan Ma, and I'm currently a final year PhD student here at the RNCM. My own practice-led research is to compositionally address an intricate entanglement between performance activities and the sound resulted from them. In 2018, I was lucky enough to be involved in this Prism Music and Science project. We co-created a sequence of 2 pieces out of this collaboration, entitled Offset-Free Etude for ensemble and solo tuba, respectively. Here are some recording snippets from the 8-cubed premiere of the ensemble version, played by soprano Hannah Boxall, saxophonist Simon Evans, pianist Aaron Breeze, and percussionist Will Graham. Despite all the differences in vocabulary and methodologies, both Keely's and my research tends to explore the nuances between different types of behaviors and expressions that usually go unnoticed. The project is centered around a presumption that a live music performance is somehow similar to a border crossing scenario. The audible, which is a sound, and the visible, the performance physicality, can perhaps also be paired with the verbal and the nonverbal. And whilst the nonverbal affects the credibility of the verbal, the visible also changes the way the audible is eventually delivered.
I was very privileged to work with Bofen. He is an amazing person and fantastic composer. We both shared common work which involved exploring the nuances, different types of expressions and gestures made by people that could easily be neglected, but could be sending a different message than what they were vocally saying and performing. Bofen composed a piece that symbolises both the complexity of human behaviour and also the challenges faced by AI researchers in trying to train the AI to recognise patterns in very complex situations. I'm very much looking forward to more collaborations in the future.
This collaboration opened up many interesting questions for my research. For example, would a smile whilst playing an instrument be seen as a genuine smile? How should I approach and deal with so-called stereotypes in my creative practice?
I'm Stephen, and I'm a composer, artist and performer from Manchester. I graduated from the Composition Masters at RNCM last year. My piece, DBA Loud, is a collaboration with scientist Graham Hayes, and it takes a playful look at the noise pollution created by airports. The basic idea of the piece is that the audience are invited to register noise complaints by throwing paper aeroplanes at the performers. Each time this happens, a performer wearing a high-vis jacket and ear defenders gets up and tries to reduce the noise level, for example by muffling amplifiers with blankets or restricting the performer's movements with sellotape. Despite all this, the amplification gets cranked up and up throughout the piece until it's ear-splittingly loud by the end. The audience are also invited to relocate themselves if they feel that the noise is getting too much. I really enjoyed collaborating with Graham on the piece, and it was a really interesting and productive process. First, we went on a field trip to Manchester Airport, where we stood close to the end of the runway to listen to and record the deafening sounds of planes landing. Over a coffee, we discussed the environmental impact of aviation, and I learnt that while plane engines are getting quieter year on year, the total number of flights continues to rise, ultimately raising the noise impact. We talked about how we might explore or perhaps dramatise this process artistically, and it was Graham who came up with the idea of audience members throwing paper planes to represent noise complaints. Collaborating in this way was really stimulating for both of us, and I'd love to do more work like it in the future.
my name's Ellen Sargent and I'm a composer currently studying for a PhD at the RNCM. I started working with Yvonne Grunder at the beginning of this year. Yvonne works in electrochemistry at the University of Liverpool. She studies the atomic behaviours of metals when they come into contact with other substances, and in particular, Yvonne looks at the surfaces of these metals. And this science can actually be applied everywhere we look. So it can be applied to making our phones more efficient, to removing CO2 from the atmosphere. So the piece I wrote in response to our collaboration is called Geiger. I had spent a day with Yvonne at the UK's synchrotron in Oxfordshire. The synchrotron is a Wembley-sized electron accelerator, and I'd got to know how these atomic structures changed and behaved when they interacted with other substances. This was something we really wanted to put in the piece. So originally, at the beginning of the process, I was trying to create textures that imitated these changing structures. I was trying to find something chaotic that other parts locked in and out of. So I spent a wonderful afternoon with my guitarist and saxophonist, Taz Noguchi and Maria Rocca, and we worked on these textures together. But the final material is actually based on something that happened at the end of our session, rather than all the material we had worked on for a couple of hours. After visiting the UK Diamond, I'd become a bit obsessed with thinking about radiation, and I'd been listening to a lot of Geiger counter samples. So I'd asked Taz and Maria if they could imitate this, and they made this really beautiful recording and with lots of deep growling saxophone and guitar scratching within this amazing pedal setup that Maria had picked out. And it was really great. So for the final piece, I actually ended up slowing this recording down and I orchestrated it for the full ensemble. I was particularly pleased because this actually created the textual behaviours I had originally been trying to make. Yvonne and I had some really great discussions during our time working together about what the collaboration meant to both of us and how it was practical and applicable to both our respective practices. For Yvonne, this collaboration was able to provide a platform so that more people could learn about her work and also about the UK Diamond. Women are also underrepresented in physics in higher education and in the workplace, and we felt this was something we could also highlight during this opportunity. So we're still working on a version of the piece that can be played by any instrumental ensemble at high school level. And we're going to have a score that includes annotations about the science behind the sounds and hopefully show the exciting nature of a physicist's work. It should be quite an engaging piece of text and have really appealing visuals, and so hopefully it'll inspire the next generation of female physicists.
My name is Joanna Verron, and I'm Emeritus Professor of Microbiology at Manchester Metropolitan University. My research interest is about microorganisms attaching onto surfaces. If conditions are appropriate, when the bugs have stuck onto the surfaces, they're able to grow and produce very complex structures called biofilms. I'm interested in seeing how the surface affects how cells attach to that surface and also how biofilms are subsequently formed.
Hey, so my name's Michael Brayley and I'm an electronic musician and composer and curator and performer and DJ and many other things. And I'm based between Manchester and Hamburg, where I'm currently studying for a master's in multimedia composition. And I make music in the broadest sense of what that means today. So my piece was a trio for violin, tenor saxophone and percussion called 3 Colonizations, and it was performed by Stephen Bradshaw, Simeon Evans and Aidan Marsden respectively. I think one interesting thing about the piece is it has quite a novel tech setup. So each musician's instrument is mic'd up and they're wearing headphones, but there's no electronic sound in the piece and no loudspeakers used, so I imagine the audience are probably wondering why they're mic'd up and why they're wearing these headphones. And what's actually happening in the piece is that the instrumentalists hear through their headphones a delayed audio feed of themselves performing, which they then emulate as close as possible in the moment. And due to the unstable sounds that they play and the fact that the musicians sometimes interject new material, and the fact that us humans, unlike machines, can never replicate anything exactly. The musical material happens to grow microbially out of mistake and out of repetition in a way that's very akin to microbial replication on a surface. I guess you could say that the instrumentalist's culture, these forever growing musical biofilms from written and heard notation, and every performance generates a new bespoke biofilm never to be heard or performed again.
For this project of 8 Cubed, I worked with Michael Brayley, and we had a couple of meetings, first of all, when we told one another about our interests in microbiology and music. Michael came to one of my talks, and I went to a concert that him and some of his colleagues gave at the RNCM. And we talked together about how microbiology might be reproduced in his interpretation and his musical performance. And I was really interested in the way that he chose to look at the way microorganisms replicate and how you could use music to overlay and introduce variations and variabilities that illustrate the formation of biofilms, really, and how external factors can affect the development of the biofilm. It was a really great experience to work with somebody like that and to try and explain my subject in a different way. And it was really rewarding to hear the piece of music at the end. It was a great event.
So I remember really wanting to work with Joe to expand my knowledge into a totally new area, and hopefully take my compositional practice down a new avenue as well. And I think both of those things happened. In fact, I remember thinking, like, I had quite a bad GCSE biology experience where I just didn't learn anything because my teacher was really bad. So I was like, this is a good opportunity to maybe increase some knowledge in an area that I'm really not very familiar with at all. And yeah, it was super great to collaborate with a scientist on this to make sure that the kind of theory that went into the piece was as rigid as possible, and I understood what I was really writing about. And yeah, and it was great to collaborate with the players on something which was kind of outside of their comfort zone, or something that they hadn't also tried before. So yeah, I think all of us kind of learned in different ways with this project, and I think that's what made it like a really exciting thing for me to be involved with.
You've been listening to Beau Fermar and Dr. Keely Crockett, Stephen Bradshaw on his project with Dr. Graham Hayes, Ellen Sargent on her collaboration with Dr. Yvonne Grunder in progress for the next 8 Cubed event, and Michael Brayley and Professor Joanna Varan. That's all for RNCM Radio this week. Next week is an Open Day special where we'll be focusing on some RNCM alumni success stories. Thank you for listening.